think that if there's any place you can be right now to try to make the world a better place, you're in the right spot, because the technology change that we need with nuclear energy is key, and Sweden is one of the places that right now sort of has last mover advantage in Scandinavia and great freedom of opportunity and all the right regulatory environments and a really harsh climate reality which inspires reliable energy. So the Anthropocene Institute, I like to say we're just trying to protect Earth's climate and comfort for sure, with an engineering safety margin in case something unexpected happens. And I like to say that seems to be the opposite of the United Nations goal, which is to decide whether to mitigate horrible climate change or adapt to horrible climate change, but never avoid horrible climate change. How do we know it's hard if we haven't tried? Let's figure out what we can actually do, and that requires asking engineers what's possible. And the United Nations tends to ask politicians what's possible, and they ask their favorite corporations what products are on the shelf, and then they choose among old technologies. So we can do better. When I refer to the fuel of supernovas, you know what I'm talking about, nucleosynthesis. A lot of people are saying that nuclear fusion is the holy grail of energy, and actually fusion's not so hot. If you were to go up to the sun and cut yourself loose a 1 cubic meter section of sun and brought it back and stuck it in your house's basement and replaced your furnace, first thing you'd find out is it doesn't hardly work. It makes about the same amount of energy as you would sitting there with your body temperature. The sun's fusion is very low energy. So we have to beat, if we want to use fusion for energy, we have to beat what the sun can do by a large margin. However, once in a while, stars do things that are impressive. When they get old, they tend to collapse and explode with a supernova, and that's impressive. If we could bottle that up and use that kind of energy, then we'd have something better than a compost heap, which is the equivalent of fusion. And turns out we can, because supernovas make all of our heavy elements, including uranium and thorium, and it's sitting around waiting for us to unlock. And that gives us a power density that fusion will never be able to equal. I work hard on both the highbrow and the lowbrow explanations of nuclear energy. When people say, oh, people don't like us, they don't like nuclear energy, no. Human beings are not born with an opinion on nuclear energy. Public opinion is a manufactured product. The public relations industry is there for you to use, or the fossil fuel industry can hire them to make nuclear look dangerous and fossil fuels look safe, which is kind of crazy, but if you don't use scientific marketing, you're not availing yourself of all the tools that we need. The best slogan I've come up with lately, nuclear energy is for health, wealth, security, and climate. Climate's number 4. Sometimes it can be even lower, but obviously we care more about our health and our wealth and our security than about climate. Nothing destroys the climate faster than war, and war is what we get when we have an over-reliance on fossil fuels. In fact, if you think about it, all the wars and conflicts that we've had since World War II, maybe not all, but 90% of them have either been fought over competition for fossil assets, or they've been financed entirely by fossil assets. Suppose we didn't care who had oil and who didn't, because nobody needs it anymore. Would we have skipped over 90% of the wars back to and including World War II? I think so. Those are artificial conflicts that we didn't need to have. So, I personally, nobody would hire me to be a nuclear engineer. But I can help by showing what I've learned about the context. And I know that institutions and people tend to just go on momentum for a long time. And I personally believe in the long-term future, 150 years from now, our entire society will be powered by hot, dry, manufactured reactors. But that leaves a lot of unknowns. And I believe that in the very near future, we will decarbonize our economy by upgrading coal-fired power plants to run on uranium and thorium instead of coal. And after that, we very well are likely to upgrade our natural gas turbines to run on uranium or thorium instead of gas. And the economic benefits will be tremendous. Now, the environmentalists are always saying, especially the Green Party, the cheapest energy you could possibly have is the energy that you never made. And that's the opposite of true. That's a horrible thing to say, because the most expensive energy that you could ever make is the energy you failed to make when you had a moral and ethical responsibility. So we are not helping the developing world develop. The most effective healthcare measure for developing economies is actually access to energy. It's not medicine, drugs, or surgery. Energy efficiency can be an excuse to skip our responsibilities to clean up our pollution. It can be an excuse to fail to provide enough water to places like Los Angeles that burn down because they haven't got enough irrigation going. We don't need to have these problems. The developing world, for instance, in Bangladesh, a person I've known since 1998, Mohammed Yunus, was just installed as the acting prime minister. Now, he was a felon on his way to prison, but because he's 85, they let him go to the Paris Olympics before prison. Then when he got home, instead of going to prison, they made him acting prime minister. Well, in the middle of that, there was a big youth-led revolution and rioting where they kicked out the dictator and then chose their Nobel Peace Prize winner, the poverty fighter Mohammed Yunus, to run the country and start to have an election process. That election took place about 5 days ago, so he can step down now. But that points out that, Bangladesh has a huge challenge because they have a nuclear power plant under construction by Russia. And I have no idea whether that's a good idea or not at this point. They ought to have better choices, is what I'm saying. If Russia's winning, nobody else is trying. So, people say affordable energy, they say the environmentalists are intent on making energy more expensive, so we'll use less of it, which is not going to happen. People are not willing to use less energy. Real progress is when we use more of something good. And I think we can use 20 times more energy, as long as it's clean, from nuclear and renewables. And if we make energy 10 times cheaper, I'm pretty sure that with Jevons paradox, we'll automatically use 20 times more energy. Because there's an awful lot of stuff we're not doing that we ought to be, like cleaning up our pollution. Waste-to-energy plants should recycle with 200% efficiency. They should take everything that goes to the trash and turn it into better products. That's how you get 200%. And there should be no combustion done. And that's easy to do. This is not, the technology we need is obvious. But nature and biodiversity will improve markedly when habitat goes up. And one of the best ways to improve habitat is to stop using biofuels. And at least ones that consume land. And people will be in much better shape when we make energy 10 times cheaper. And that's something that we could have done a long time ago. The United Nations claims that net zero is going to solve our climate problem. And they claim net zero 2050 will solve our problem. Not true. Today, the climate is already affected. It's dangerous. Lots of things are going wrong. We can all see it. And so the UN's idea, CO2 was at 280 parts per million pre-industrial. It's gone up to 420. If you think that's safe, you're smoking something. And the UN would like to keep it at that level forever if that was possible. But a sane person says, you know, we had 20,000 years of 280, that seemed to work well. Let's go back there. And we don't know if we can't, if we haven't tried. So that's my goal. Climate restoration is sort of the name of the movement for people that actually want to fix what we broke instead of sitting on the scrap, the broken world. This is an example of something the UN tries to ignore. I'm not worried about global warming because ocean acidification is so much worse, scarier, easier to understand, and a sooner potential disaster. Nobody can tell you what the ocean is going to do as it gets more acidic because the ocean is a smart set of chaotic, intelligent systems that haven't decided what to do yet. But we do know that we should not change the plankton's lifestyle in a major way. And the Japanese Meteorological Association has gathered these numbers from spots near Japan. And if you know anything about chemistry, that change in pH is really significant. And you know, now people trying to grow oysters have to, like in the Northwest United States, they get the smell, the baby oysters, from Hawaii because they can't grow baby oysters in the Northwest anymore. So this is urgent. We can fix it. That kind of shows what happens to the calcium carbonate dependent plankton as they try to grow up in an acid environment. Acid in the ocean is just carbonic acid, which is another name for CO2. So we need to draw it down quickly. But again, we don't need to worry about the climate. Let's worry about death. I'm against death. If you know 6 dead people, one of them would be alive today if we had stopped using fossil fuels when France showed us that we didn't need fossil fuels back in the 1980s. Because also 3/4 of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today were emitted after France showed us we didn't need to do that. Somebody's trying to kill you, and they have a 1 out of 1,000 chance of succeeding this year and every year. They're trying to kill everyone else as well. It's the fossil fuel pollution industry. If we eliminate that, that's serious. Now, nuclear energy is not perfectly safe, but it doesn't kill 1 out of 1,000 people every year. You know, nobody's perfect, but we can be 1,000,000 times better. That's what we are, and we should stand up and claim credit for that. A lot of people want to preserve the Paris goal, but the IPCC's Paris goal is not my Paris goal. My Paris goal is to be as good as Paris. In other words, 0% carbon from the grid, because they got to 70% nuclear and 26% hydropower. That's the goal of Paris. Forget about anything else you might have heard. But we need to go further and also get transportation fuels to be synthetic hydrocarbon fuels using nuclear energy to produce them. That doesn't cost anything, right? Using newer technology is cheaper than older technology. We try to help this. We have a site called GotNuclear that has a little link where you can click on every nuclear power plant in the United States or France, a lot of Europe or Japan, and see how many lives it has saved so far because it avoided having a deadly coal plant put in position there. Now, one problem is when we see anti-science out there, we need to work a little harder to fight it. And this linear, no threshold, no safe dose of radiation that a lot of people get their income implementing regulations based on those ideas, that's false. We've known it was false actually since Nagasaki. And it's extremely costly, and the consequence is keeping fossil fuel in business. We really need to get rid of that fantasy. We're not even allowed to experiment with humans exposed to radiation because it's assumed to be dangerous based on fake science. But when we did have an accidental experiment where a whole bunch of people in Taiwan were living in apartment buildings accidentally made with radioactive steel that had included a recycled ball of cobalt, 60, it turns out there was a huge health impact that you can see right there. So the people with a lot of radiation exposure had almost no cancer. And the normal people who didn't get the extra radiation in their apartment building had high cancer. And that's the opposite of what we're taught to expect. But that's the nice thing about experimental science. You know, you do an experiment, and when it comes out the opposite of what you expect, you're supposed to change your expectations instead of hiding the science. That's something about physical reality that you got to respect the data. Now, people say nuclear energy is too expensive, but does anyone here know what the cost of nuclear energy is in 2026? I would say no, because you don't know the cost of any manufactured product until the factory that makes it has at least 5 or 10 years to streamline the supply chain. There's no factory on Earth that's making nuclear power modules. Heck, the fuel pellets are lucky to be made in an automated way. So we don't know, but we can extrapolate. Solar panels in the last 40 years, they didn't change the product, but the panels got 100 times cheaper, just about. That's pretty good. That doesn't mean that solar is the only answer. It does mean that we need to let other industries improve also. And so I would say that we can make nuclear at least 11 times cheaper just based on the ordinary evolution that every manufactured product has. It did not change in 50 years because of regulatory fiat, not because the engineers didn't know how to make it better every year. So if we make energy 10 times cheaper, which I'm quite sure is possible without changing the product, but manufacturing, we can consume 20 times as much of it. But the thing is, institutions are, my theory of change doesn't involve telling a whole bunch of people, oh, the climate's important, you should work on it. That's true, but it's not going to overcome the momentum of industry to make money. And humans who try to get in the way of a big company or a big institution and its revenue stream, those humans find their career limited. So we need to expect that our big institutions are going to continue to try to increase their revenues and profits. And there's not much any human being can do about that. Which is why, if we want to actually change the world, we have to find something that can have the best kind of organic growth, organic capitalism. That means organic capitalism is this old weird idea where a company makes money and then they take the profits and plow them into growth and then they expand. Hardly ever happens anymore, but when it does, you can change an industry. And the alternative to that is usually where policymakers and government choose what the outcome is, and then they subsidize it to death to try to make it happen, even though it's not economic. And we need to have more organic capitalism. Now, hot, dry manufactured reactors. I'm not a fan of the idea of SMR because small modular reactor doesn't really mean anything, and too vague doesn't help. Hot, in my view, would be 600 degrees C output or better. That couples with industry. It also allows you to repower coal-fired power plants and even repower natural gas turbines. And that's how we're going to reindustrialize and zero out our carbon output. China has already started on converting coal to nuclear. They have one underway. They have 1,152 coal-fired power plants that were built pretty recently that totally deserve to be in operation for the next 100 years. But they've got to stop burning coal. And as I say, if they like the taste of the first one, pretty soon China will have the cheapest carbon-free energy anywhere on Earth with 1,152 operating converted nuclear power plants. So let's get ahead of that, okay? It's not okay just to admire China. We have to work as hard as they do. Dry fuel is simply a matter of safety. If you don't have water touching the fuel, you can't have the problems that Fukushima Daiichi had. If there's no fallout cloud that can go downwind, you don't need to worry your neighbors downwind, which means you don't need to have a huge exclusion zone for safety around the reactor. And that's one of the things that allows it to go into an existing coal plant. And you don't need to build a containment building that history shows us doesn't even work. We had 3 of them fail at Fukushima Daiichi. So don't build stuff that doesn't work, okay? Manufactured reactors, as I mentioned, difference between a Timex and a Rolex, several orders of magnitude in cost. It's not the product, it's the factory. And this is saying the same thing I already did. There you go. And this is more on the coal to nuclear transition. It's already happening in the United States as well. So we kind of know, we can visualize what it looks like to have a world where we have a factory that's making reactors that are sitting there on the loading dock waiting for somebody to order them. And then they get shipped by heavy shipping to any location on the world. And that is the future that we're all going to, that'll be evident at some point in the future. So, but by working on any kind of atomic energy, we're making that closer at hand. And, you know, the old biofuels versus nuclear debate, you know, the heart of the oil world in the Mideast, their 1,000 dirham note currency has new nuclear modules on it. That's beautiful. On the other hand, in Malaysia, they're in the oil business. That's what they want to do. And their money has an oil palm and palm oil molecule, which they want to sell so that Europeans can drive around in circles in their diesels, destroying rainforest habitat, destroying biodiversity. We need a lot less of that. So that's kind of the direction we have. And so thanks so much for your kind attention. And we have to work a lot harder to beat fossil fuels. I'm sure that we can and will. And I don't know if my animation will play. One of the things that's kind of lowbrow here that we do for communications is this character Stacky represents a nuclear power plant stack, and he's, I don't know, I guess I can't make him play, but we can put any kind of animation on him. This is Stacky. And, you know, I think no oil wars will be a big part of our messages going forward, because we don't need to be fighting silly wars over oil anymore. And later on, we'll have some of our other more intellectual products, like the report on carbon exchange and nuclear power, especially here in Sweden, where we've done research on that. We also even have a comic book for children to fill in and learn about nuclear versus coal, Stacky. I guess, we have a huge opportunity here. The technology will change someday, and the sooner we can make it happen, and if we get out ahead of it, the more opportunity will flow to us. Sweden has a fantastic advantage with an extremely modern, well-educated workforce, and last mover advantage is a great thing here. There's great freedom of operation. But if we just keep letting politicians choose off-the-shelf products from their favorite old vendors, we're not going to get anywhere. I've been lucky enough to see new startup companies displace huge industries several times in my career. It can happen. It can happen here. It will happen someday. So thanks very much for your attention. That's all I got.